Thank you for listening to this podcast from TRE, Talk Radio Europe, your voice in Spain and around the world. For more information, please visit tre.radio.
The TRE Bookshow is sponsored by audible.co.uk. Download one title each month, plus unlimited listening to thousands of Audible originals, podcasts and audiobooks. Just click on the Audible banner at www.tre.radio.
The Book Programme, presented by Hannah Murray.
Good evening, book lovers, and Happy New Year. Hope you enjoyed the festive season. This is the first normal book show of 2025. As per usual, I'll start by looking at the bestseller lists on amazon.co.uk and the Sunday Times. I can tell you there are no new entries this week. Then we'll be chatting to Kat Thurston. She has a Master's in English Literature from Oxford University, a Guinness World Record for paragliding, and holds a private pilot's licence. Her novel, The Orchid Papers, is an empowering story based on true events of a woman who loses everything but gradually finds love, friendship and meaning out of the ashes of her former privileged life. Set on the idyllic island of Jersey, the book explores themes such as wealthy inequality, the immorality of tax havens and female solidarity. We're also chatting to Emmanuel Olympitis, a British businessman who's held many public company directorships during his career. His first children's book, Whispers in the Park, is the first in a new series that takes the reader on an adventure through the treetops and undergrowth of St James's Park. The book is beautifully illustrated by his daughter, Olympia, who is a full-time illustrator based in London and Wiltshire. And we're chatting to Jamie C. McNeish, a hotel child turned hospitality entrepreneur. After a brief stint as an actor, he owned catering businesses and found his true calling in writing screenplays and novels. Following his mother's death, he's written a novel delving into the chaotic world of his own family in the hospitality industry. Who's Looking After Who is a comedy drama about a family who are trying to do everything at once with so many things going wrong. That's just the first hour. In the second hour, we chat to Rosie Radcliffe, K.L. Huntley, Lisa Lucas and Steve Landsberg, and Mira Harrison.
The Book Programme, presented by Hannah Murray.
Good evening and welcome to The Book Show. As always, we start by looking at the Sunday Times bestseller list, the oldest and most influential book sales chart in the UK and the one that every author wants to be on. This chart is the most accurate and comprehensive estimation of book sales in the country. Novelists and memoirists have been battling it out for months, but the book that won the coveted crown of Christmas #1 was Guinness World Records 2025. It's the fifth time the annual has done this since records began. Samantha Harvey's Orbital was Christmas #3. It's a popular Booker winner, but has way to go before besting Life of Pi's 43-week run in the paperback bestseller list. So looking at general hardbacks, there are no new entries, which is pretty normal for this time of year. At #1, I Haven't Been Entirely Honest With You by Miranda Hart. #2, Ted, a Porter Biography by Ted the Dog. #3, Diddly Squat, Home to Roost by Jeremy Clarkson. #4 is Unleashed by Boris Johnson. #5, All That Matters by Chris Hoy. #6, This Time Next Year by David Jason. #7, The Memoir Part 1 by Cher. #8, Finding the Edge by Jimmy Anderson. #9, Sunny Boy by Al Pacino. And #10, What I Ate in 1 Year by Stanley Tucci. Fiction hardbacks, again, no new entries. At #1, We Solve Murders by Richard Osman. #2, In Too Deep by Lee Child and Andrew Child. #3, The Hotel Avocado by Bob Mortimer. #4, Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. #5, Killing Time by Alan Bennett. #6 is Murder Under the Mistletoe by Richard Coles. Number 7, Midnight and Blue by Ian Rankin. Number 8 is Precipice by Robert Harris. Number 9, Guilty by Martina Cole and Jackie Rose. And number 10 is Carla's Choice by Nick Harkaway. Looking at bestsellers on amazon.co.uk for this week, there are a lot of adult colouring books, 4 in the top 10, all by the same author or illustrator, I should say. So it's obviously a popular time of year for adults to colour in. At number 1 is Onyx Storm, which is the follow-up to the global phenomenon's Fourth Wing and Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros. Number 2, The Glucose Goddess Method by Jessie Inchauspe. Number 3, Board of Lunch, 6-ingredient slow cooker by Nathan Anthony. Number 4, Atomic Habits by James Clear. Number 5, Girl Moments. This is a colouring book for adults and teens featuring cute, cosy daily activities for relaxation. This is by Coco Wyo. Number 6, Glucose Revolution, the life-changing power of balancing your blood sugar. That's also Jessie and Chauspe. Number 7, Cozy Friends, a colouring book for adults and teens featuring super cute animal characters with easy and simple designs for relaxation, also by Coco Wyo. Number 8, Make Change That Lasts, 9 Simple Ways to Break Free from the Habits That Hold You Back. That's by Dr. Ranjan Chatterjee. Number 9, Little Corner, colouring book for adults and teens, super cute designs of cosy spaces for relaxation by Coco Wyo. And finally, number 10, also by Coco Wyo, Stress Relief, colouring book for adults and kids, bold and easy, simple and big designs for relaxation featuring animals, landscape, flowers, patterns, cute things and many more. I have to say they do look rather nice, these adult colouring books, so if you fancy getting into that in the new year, I recommend checking them out on Amazon by Coco Wyo. That's WYO.
The Book Programme. Presented by Hannah Murray.
You're listening to the Book Club on Talk Radio Europe. And keep listening. That's an instruction from Margaret Thatcher.
Joining us on the line now is Kat Thurston. She has a Master's in English Literature from Oxford University, a Guinness World Record for paragliding, and holds a private pilot's license. After her divorce, she set her heart on a new life as a bush pilot in Africa, but serendipity led her to Las Vegas. Her novel is an empowering story based on true events of a woman who loses everything but gradually finds love, friendship and meaning out of the ashes of her former privileged life. Set on the idyllic island of Jersey, The Orchid Papers explores themes such as wealth inequality, the immorality of tax havens and female solidarity. Welcome to the Book Show, Kat.
Oh, hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you with us and congratulations. It must feel really strange having this book out there now.
Well, it certainly does because it is largely based on real events and inspired by things that happened to me, which going through the writing process, you're sitting alone with your thoughts, with your memories, and then suddenly, bang, it's out there and people are asking me, well, which bits are true? It feels quite vulnerable, but it's my story and it's out there. And there are very important things that I wanted to say about corruption, about the island of Jersey, which, I used to absolutely adore. It's an idyllic place. It's tiny, 5 miles by 9, but it has a huge punch. And it's one of those places that on the surface, it's all beaches and sunshine and a lot of history. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous place, but sort of underneath, it's absolutely seething with archaic rules and connections with people who want to encourage wealth inequality, basically. So, I had a lot to say and now it's out there. So it actually feels good.
Yeah, great. So can you tell us a little bit about your story and what happened to you?
So I had a very privileged life, really. I was living in Jersey, thought my life was perfect. I had the kids in school, I had lots of friends. And as I said, it is just beautiful. And then my life turned upside down when I discovered my husband had a double life, and events unfolded partly because of the island and the island rules. So the events kick off in the story because the protagonist gets thrown out of her home because of archaic laws which say that the residential qualifications to stay on the island are linked to a qualified residence, which in my case was my husband and not me. So I had to leave the home. And I was like, oh my gosh. In this era, it's just quite shocking to come across that.
Yeah.
And then, all sorts of events happened after that, which I got a lawyer. The lawyer suddenly dropped my case. I was trying to find out information about my husband's business. And because of the secrecy laws inherent in a tax haven island, I wasn't able to get any information. God. So things went on from there. So in exploring my story about just one person trying to get divorced and trying to get information, I came across the whole concept of shell companies, of people that want to hide bank account information. And why is that? Why does somebody want to hide all that? And so I had this sort of idea about secrecy, which I came up on some multiple layers. So there's the secrecy of the husband having a duplicitous life. There's the secrecy of the island. There's the secrecy of the rulers that in democratic society that you vote for, you think they're doing good, but actually they're up to no good. And then obviously the whole book is actually a whistleblower story. So it's about the flip side of secrecy is telling the truth. And my protagonist is bravely actually stands up and just says, to speak out about this at personal cost.
Gosh, it must have just been one hell of a shock, one after the other, when this was all happening to you.
Yeah, I mean, I trusted my husband. Now I just feel a bit stupid because I sort of let him do everything and I didn't inquire. I was very busy. I did lots of charity work. I had my 3 children and, we did a lot of traveling. I just didn't concern myself with everything that he was doing, traveling all over the world. I didn't have anything in my own name and I just took care of sort of my side of things and he was busy taking care of his side of things. So maybe I'm the last of an era, a stay-at-home mum doing charity work. And so I learned the hard way. Things come out of it that are wonderful. And, I have some truly amazing friends. The theme in my book is the solidarity of women. We came together sharing other women's stories and people have been in a very similar situation and we pulled together and one day at a time we all got there. So, the story has a happy ending.
Yeah, great. So where does the title come from, The Orchid Papers?
I was excited about the concept of things that look beautiful on the outside but are corrupt underneath. And an orchid is a beautiful flower, but it's an epithet that grows in a parasitic way off a host tree. And also on the island of Jersey, it's known for its wild orchids. So I'm sort of playing with this idea. And the name of the antagonist's business is the Orchid Corporation, and the duplicitous nature of individuals, that people can be beautiful. And my antagonist is a handsome man who's very charming and quietly spoken. Underneath, obviously, he had a sort of horrid morality underneath, so sort of ugly underneath, beautiful on the top. So the orchids fit that. And then the Orchid Papers, it's sort of tapping into a few years ago, the whole financial industry was thrown on its head with the Paradise Papers and the Panama Papers and that sort of thing, where there were whistleblowers who spoke up very, very bravely about the corruption that was going on in the bank or with people who want to hide away their money by setting up proxy directors for a company and put money away into a bank account that nobody will know about. So it's not just avoiding tax. A lot of criminals around the world are using these facilities. And the island of Jersey, it's all very sort of middle class and civilized and just very nicely ordered. But then actually the wealth managers, the bank people and the trust fund managers, they are enablers for this enormous worldwide corruption. I put forward the idea that they weren't there enabling the rest of the world who want to, the corrupt members of of our planet who want to abuse this system, they enable that. So if they weren't there, maybe this wouldn't happen. And because, I also thought that, the book, I wanted to have a wider reach. It's not just a personal story. And I was thinking, maybe I'm not going to get too much sympathy of somebody who's had a really wonderful, very, very privileged life. So I draw the parallel with, there's a story inside the main narrative, which takes the corruption back to a village in Africa where the rulers are siphoning away state money and hiding it on Jersey. And this happens to the other British jurisdictions as well that operate as tax havens. And you see that, with all the funds that are by the end of the story, all the funds that are being taken out of that country, and actually I create a fictitious country in Africa to make it more generic. The local services are restored and the people are able to prosper again with proper funding of schools and healthcare system, which they weren't able to do because before the president was able to siphon off the money and hide it away. There's a wide reach in my book. It's not just the personal story.
Wow. So is there any comeback on this? Does your ex-husband know you've done this? How would everybody from this situation feel about it, do you think?
Lots of people I know in Jersey are reading it, so I've been very keen to hear what they say because, I have friends who are directly involved in the wealth hiding business, wealth managers, trust fund people. But at the beginning of the book, I make the point that everybody had a blind eye. I don't think anybody thought about it. Nobody talked about it. This is really, really early days. The book's only just come out, so I haven't had any feedback except for some friends who just obviously gush and want to support me. So the answer is that I don't really know yet. I had some anxiety about my children reading it because although there is a separation between fact and our story to serve the larger story, and, I have 3 children, but I've got 2 children which are not either of my children exactly. I realized that the whole book I've built in a frame story that the woman the protagonist who is writing the story, he wants to tell the story to her children. She wants to tell the truth because the husband has been telling her narrative and she wants to tell her own narrative. So she starts to write this book called The Orchid Papers. And at the end of the story, she gives this narrative. She gives the Orchid Papers to her children and invites them to a quiet place where they can be for several weeks so that they can read it and discuss, because sometimes truths are difficult. But the idea behind the book is that we must speak up, however difficult that is. And key is communication. We must sort of talk about it. So I have built I didn't realize I was doing this, but I have built my anxiety about sharing our story into my story. Obviously, this is happening now because, I don't know whether my 3 children are reading it or not reading it, but truth is my thing. I don't want to hide anything from them. And obviously for this, I've warned them that for the services of the narrative towards the end, there are certain exaggerations and definitely their father would never have wanted to harm them in any way. But I have made my antagonist darker. So, I've warned them, but I do have some anxiety about people reading it. But then I'm saying, be a whistleblower, face those difficult things. And, and we're here to talk about them. So the answer is always communication in every way.
Absolutely. And how did you end up in Las Vegas? Was that a while ago now?
So in the Orchid Papers, the end of the story, she has to leave the island. The island is very dangerous and toxic. And, she actually flees with her life with her girlfriends that have helped her. And she has met a man on internet dating and she goes into hiding. And there's a hint that she's going to be starting a relationship with this man. And he is all about authenticity and brutal honesty. And after all the lies, this is very appealing to her. So there's a hint that she's going to have a relationship with this man. So in reality, it was the end of my story on Jersey. I was internet dating after my divorce. So there's a jump in time. He lived in Las Vegas. So I was actually on my way to I was going to Las Vegas to do flight training because I thought about what does a new life look like? And I was going to be a bush pilot pilot in Africa working for an NGO. They wanted certain sort of qualifications, which I didn't have. So I was over in Las Vegas and doing my flight training and doing some internet dating and met him. And he swept me off my feet and we got married. And that has just ended in disaster.
Oh, no.
So, the irony of it is in the Orchid Papers, there's a lot of discussion about the lies and with the first husband and why does infidelity happen? Why do the lies start? Where does love go? And in the Orchid Papers, she joins a therapy group with these 3 other women to sort of work through this and come up in the Orchid Papers. I come up with some wonderful ideas about what I think arrogantly now, what I think makes a wonderful relationship based on these ideas of just openness, honesty, authenticity, just facing everything that's sort of difficult. And then, of course, I've played that out in real life. And unfortunately, my second husband got very ill. The dynamics changed enormously. And that's literally just failed. I mean, I was divorced again in September. So this is all very fresh.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Although I presented some ideas, which I hope are useful for people about relationships, because it's still a very, very deep dive into all of that. Obviously, it's all about the questions and not about the answers. So
sounds like you've got another book in you.
Well, I don't know whether I want to completely leave this subject. So I've come up to the mountains now, and I'm here for the winter. And I'm going to write a new book. And it's going to be about something completely different, something else I feel passionate about, which is animal conservation. So we're going to leave humans.
Fair enough. Animals are probably less complicated. Well, if people want to get a copy of the Orchid Papers, it's out now, and it's by Kat Thurston, who we've been chatting with today. The book is available on our website in the bookshop section on TRE.radio. Kat, thanks so much for being with us.
Yeah, it was fantastic. I really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you.
The Book Programme, presented by Hannah Murray.
Joining us on the line now is Emmanuel Olympitis, who's a British businessman who's held many public company directorships during his career. He's also the author of By Victories Undone and Marked Cards. But he's turned his pen from novels and memoirs to write children's fiction. And he didn't need to look far for an illustrator. He's teamed up with his daughter Olympia, who is a full-time illustrator based between London and Wiltshire. And together they've created Whispers in the Park. It's the first book of a series which takes the readers on the most ancient and prestigious school for squirrels, which is in St. James's Park. It's a rollicking adventure through the treetops. Welcome to the book show, Emmanuel and Olympia.
Thank you, Hannah. Thanks very much.
Thanks for having us.
It's great to have you both with us. So let's start with you, Emmanuel. Why did you decide to write children's fiction, having written adult books previously?
Well, I didn't really, and that's really a question for Olympia, because Olympia, who has had a lot of success in illustrating, had not yet been published and hadn't done a children's book and wanted to do one. And so she asked me, and Olympia, do you want to take on from there? I mean,
well, I suppose the question came from me because I've always wanted to illustrate a children's book. I thought it might be a bit further down the line. And Dad, when we were little, Dad used to tell us these amazing stories about woodland creatures. And they were really funny. And I suppose they stuck in my head. And so I asked him, would you ever collaborate on a book? And you could do the story based on the characters from my childhood, and I could illustrate it. And so, yeah, it went from there, and we kind of pulled our ideas together, and then that was how it turned to children's and not your usual kind of adult fiction or memoirs.
Yeah, great. So did you have kind of stories and characters already in your head then, Emmanuel, that you were kind of making up from years ago?
No, well, it started like that, but it was not easy. I mean, just to go back to your original question, it wasn't easy going from writing for adults, grown-ups, whatever you want, a better word, to children, because my style of writing is very old-fashioned, because I'm pretty old. And so it's even more difficult to adapt an old-fashioned style of writing to a child today. I found it really quite difficult. The characters, some were vaguely based on the stories Olympia's telling you about, but mainly I was wandering through St. James's Park and these squirrels were leaping around. It was a wonderful autumn day. And that gave me the idea for the school. And from then, I tried to make my writing a little bit more child-friendly. I don't know if I've succeeded or not. I suspect I haven't, but I'm hoping that it turns out to be a book for all the family. And Olympia, every couple of chapters, I would send them to Olympia so that she could get to know the characters. She would start her illustrations.
There was one squirrel from the stories I used to tell when we were little, who came from London and was a sort of Hooray Henry type that I think sparked the school for squirrels. He was the kind of inspiration behind the headmaster, wasn't he, Dad? And then but you changed him and we went from there.
That's Horatio.
Yeah, he's actually also based on my prep school headmaster. Yeah, it's a bit of an amalgamation.
Yes, that's quite a funny thing, actually, because Olympia had a headmaster called Philip Hoyland, and his wife was Henrietta Hoyland, and they ran this wonderful old-fashioned prep school in Wiltshire. When we were talking about the squirrel, the headmaster, I was talking to Olympia about him. She said to me, "That's Mr. Hoyland." And so I said, yes. And so we ended up calling them Mr. and Mrs. Hoyland, changed the first name to Horatio. And they were absolutely stunned because they're retired now. And they were absolutely stunned when we told them we'd done this. And they had a book coming out. There was a book coming out with their names very prominently figuring in it because it's pretty much a lead role.
Oh, so he was chuffed then.
He was very chuffed.
Yeah.
And they very sweetly came down.
It was so sweet.
From Yorkshire, to where they'd retired, to a book launch, which we had. We had a small party last week, and they looked rather dazed, actually, but absolutely loving every minute of it. It was very touching.
Yeah, very nice. So tell us about some of the other characters, because it's not just squirrels, is it?
No, we thought that we couldn't just have squirrels, and that it was in the park, and it was a question of how they interfaced with the other animals in the park. And also, we decided that I thought that we should have the other animals should be the teachers, apart from the headmaster. So there's an owl who's a deputy headmaster. There's a hedgehog who's the head of the lower school. There's a vole who is the school janitor. There are field mice all over the place. There's an otter who teaches swimming in the lake. So those are the school teachers. And then there's Badger, who teaches sports. And then there's a fox who's a rather sophisticated, charming, but tricky, as you would expect, fox, who lives in the park, who actually is a master criminal. There's stoats and weasels.
It must have been great fun coming up with all these characters, because a lot of the time you can use the characteristics that we already know about these animals and turn them into human personalities.
Yeah. Exactly.
They're very satirical.
Yeah, and the fox has a good side. That comes out every now and then. He's actually very protective of the park, even though he's a criminal. And the badger is quite a sort of gruff badger, but he loves his students. And it is actually enormous fun. And it's so much more rewarding, I have to say, than writing for grown-ups.
Yeah.
It's kind of joyous, and you can sort of spread fun and joy to people by calling characters after them, like the Hoylands, and it's so much more rewarding.
Yeah. And at what point did you decide that this was going to be the first in a series then?
I think when I was about halfway through, I suddenly started getting more and more ideas and talking to Olympia about them, Olympia being enthusiastic about them. And so we realized that there were more books there. And I've written the second one, so that's done. We've got ideas for the third one. Olympia still has to illustrate the second one. We've got ideas for the third one. So it'll be a trilogy to start with, and then we'll just see how it goes. If it has any kind of following, we'll carry on, and if it doesn't, that'll be that. But it will have been a wonderful experience.
Yeah. So Olympia, at what point do you kind of get involved? Have you been a bit involved with the stories, or do you just come in and illustrate them after they've finished?
Well, it was funny because I think Dad expected me not to be involved with the stories at all and just to sort of illustrate it. But we would discuss the kind of storyline, and I would chip in, which I think was surprising enough. But then he would send me the chapter by chapter. And I think he was a bit surprised when I would come back with a dot of red pen and say, oh, I think that maybe this character should be a bit more like this. But of course, it's all his main storyline. But I did have quite a lot more input that must have been a little bit annoying as we went along the way.
It was very fun because she started commenting. I didn't mind comments on the characters.
Yeah.
But it was very annoying when she started commenting on the prose. And so my instant reaction was, you just stick to the story and I'll write the bloody book. But she was actually very good, because going back to when I said that writing for adults, the transition was quite tricky, and I'm not at all sure I've accomplished it. Olympia was very helpful there, because when she said a red line, you see, what she'd do is she'd sort of put a red mark under where I'd written that Hoyland, for example, Hoyland had a visceral loathing for the headmaster of the Squirrel School in Holland Park, because this school for squirrels, they play games against the squirrel schools in Holland Park and Hyde Park and Kensington Gardens, etc. as well. And there's a lot of rivalry that goes on. And that's all part of the storyline. But, and Olympia would say things like, what's wrong with just saying that didn't like him much? What's this visceral loathing bit for doing in a children's book? I mean, it was things like that I sort of made. So I was able slightly to make it simpler. And actually, it's obviously it's better written. It reads better.
So you had to push your ego aside and realise that she had some good points.
Yeah. You did it very well.
Yes, and then I was even accused of being slightly racist, because I was distinguishing between the red squirrels and the grey squirrels. I had to be careful. I had to be careful not to give either of them supremacy over the other.
Oh yes, all squirrels are equal. Yes, all squirrel lives matter.
It was also, I just wanted it to, even though it's an old-fashioned style of writing in tone, I wanted it to be quite kind of, I don't know, inclusive, I suppose.
Yeah.
And I insisted on some good female teachers and that sort of thing. And then Dad was, very surprising when he brought in a very strong female detective. And I was really like that.
Yeah, nice.
Got a good range.
Actually, Olympia was shocked by that, you see, because there's a Siamese cat who is in each book solves a mystery. There's a crime in each book. And it's a kind of, children's version of an Agatha Christie crime. And you find out on the last page who's done it. The sort of Hercule Poirot character, the detective who comes in, is a Siamese cat. And Olympia went into shock when I made her a female one. And was thrilled, but I mean, quite shocked by it.
Lovely. So, is there a kind of age range that I know it would be lovely for families, but do you have to be aware of what age the books are aimed at?
Well, it's sort of the older range. I mean, I think 9 to 11, 8 to 11, maybe 12. I don't know. That kind of.
Yeah.
The purpose of it, because it's got such a nostalgic sort of tone to it, a bit more like Wind in the Willows or one of the older children's books. It can be, I think it's sort of designed to be read to younger children as well as being read by older children. So it's sort of something that everyone in the family can kind of read together, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yes, I hope that adults, will read it too. I mean, I have some friends, and they've enjoyed it.
Lovely. And
funny.
when you came up with the characters, was it easy, do you think, Olympia, to picture them in art form, you know, hearing them described and thinking about their character and what they're like to then transform them onto the page? How was that process?
Yeah, well, it was the first time for me doing that, because I've illustrated animals before, sort of pets and animals for maps and that sort of thing, but I've never really brought them to life with human clothing and everything like that. But Dad and I had, on walks, we would chat about the characters at length. And so I had such a sort of clear picture of them in my mind, and also from scouring through the chapters. But we knew that, for instance, the fox was going to be really old-fashioned, and he would have a waistcoat and a silver-topped cane. And we discussed, would there be some sort of use for the cane? Would there be some sort of weapon inside the cane? Probably not, but, it's all up to interpretation. And then the teachers are very sort of satirical, like the games master Badger, he would look exactly like a prep school football coach or rugby coach and be very burly.
It's true. It works really well. I'm looking at your drawing of the games master, and I feel like I can hear his voice by looking at the drawing. Yeah. Very clever.
Although I wanted to describe and did describe each animal to Olympia, because we'd had these walks, because we'd gone through all this process, we had exactly the same vision of what the character was like. And that was what was extraordinary, actually. And so that went very well.
Yeah.
And I was able to criticize Olympia then, you see.
Yeah.
I was able to say, well, I don't really like this expression. I don't think that works. I think he or she should be smiling or crying or whatever. Yeah. I don't think you've brought that out enough. So I got my own back.
So I would always send Dad a pencil sketch, sort of my very first rough one of the character. And then he would reply back saying, great, or something. But what about a different collar? What was that collar that you suggested for a wing top collar?
A wing collar.
Oh, yeah. Or something like that. And then I would
for the headmaster,
send it back.
Yeah,
brilliant.
Yeah, exactly. Those sorts of things. But I have to say that, Olympia, you ought to mention, because Olympia, her illustrations are known for her vivid use of colour. And I won't say problem, but the effect of this book being quite a grown-up one, relatively grown-up one, was that she came to the conclusion by herself, and it was absolutely the right conclusion, that black and white was more appropriate and more traditional for a more grown-up book. And so for Olympia, it's been quite a departure, actually, going black and white, hasn't it, though? You ought to speak to that. That's interesting.
It does work. Because originally I did all the illustrations in colour, and then we sort of realised that, yes, it was a bit more grown up in tone, in an old-fashioned sort of way, a more nostalgic way. So we swapped to black and white, and then we were really surprised at how good it looked in black and white, and how it did suit the tone of the book so much more. And we still have the really colourful front and back cover, so that that gives a bit of the atmosphere as well for the park.
Yeah, lovely. Well, if people want to get a copy of Whispers in the Park, it's out now. It's by Emmanuel Olympitis and illustrated by Olympia Olympitis, and it's available on our website, tre.radio. Thank you both so much for joining us, and congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us, Anna.
The Book Programme, presented by Hannah Murray.
Joining us on the line now is Jamie C. McNeish, a hotel child turned hospitality entrepreneur. After a brief stint as an actor, he owned catering businesses and found his true calling in writing screenplays and novels. Following his mother's death, he's written a fictional novel delving into the chaotic world of his own family in the hospitality industry. It's a comedy drama about a family who are trying to do everything at once with so many things going wrong. Who's Looking After Who is based on Jamie's own upbringing, a very personal, imaginative and funny depiction of exaggerated real life in the 1970s. Welcome to the book show, Jamie.
Hello.
Hi. Congratulations on your book. It sounds great fun.
Oh, thank you. something I've wanted to do for a while now.
Yeah, so it must have been strange kind of looking back over your past and your childhood and turning it into a funny book.
Yeah, it was after my mother passed away, and then so she passed away, and she always wanted me to write about her. So I kind of waited until she wasn't here anymore, and then my dad was still alive at the time, and I started to write the book, and I started to ask him questions and stories, because they always had so many funny stories to tell about, like they were all the hotels, and this one's set in a tea shop in Millport, which is a island on the west coast of Scotland, and they had so many funny stories, and I would ask my dad questions, and unfortunately he got ill and passed away as well. But I didn't want to make it all serious. I wanted to make it funny, because they were light-hearted people.
Yeah. Oh, nice. So are the characters in the book based on your parents?
Well, yeah, they're basically is my parents. I've used their real names and my own real name, because I'm the baby that's born at the very beginning.
Right, and on the kitchen floor?
On the kitchen floor, yes. And then, like, my brother, he's my real brother, but I've changed his name to Frank. And then he's like, they've got him working at a young age of 4 years old, working dishes in the tea shop. But my character, the baby, actually thinks like an adult and has very dark humour and judges all his family.
Brilliant. So tell us a bit more about your parents then, and their relationship and role with the business.
Right, well, they were both PE teachers to start with, and they worked out quite soon that they weren't going to make much money doing that, and my mum kind of went on holidays to this island in Millport. It was like before people went away properly abroad, back in the 1950s and 60s, they'd go to it's about an hour from Glasgow. They'd get a ferry and go to the island. And my grandparents had this little house there called the Wee House, because it was a small house, and everyone would gather in. People would, like, my mum and my auntie would sleep in the kitchen. You know, it was all it was always fun and like lots of singing and stuff. So my mum desperately wanted to go back to Millport to live, and then they bought this tiny little business with no money. They borrowed money and stuff, and then they didn't know what they were doing. I mean, it was absolutely chaos to begin with, because also they had like us, the two kids, plus they had two red setter dogs, and those dogs had 14 puppies. So I've basically taken that scenario and written a book about it.
Oh, brilliant, brilliant. And what do you, obviously not much as a baby, but as you grew up, what do you remember about that time?
I remember later, because we bought a hotel after, and that'll be my second book, is set in the hotel. So I remember more about the hotel. I was a baby during the period of the tea shop. So I got most of the information from my dad, but I also exaggerated, made up a lot of stories as well to put in to make it more dramatic, obviously.
Yeah.
I remember just its freedom, like as a young child born in the 70s and growing up in the early 80s, you just had so much freedom, you know, and a lot of the scenarios in the book are things that people now, mothers nowadays would go, I can't believe that you're leaving a pram outside just for anybody to pick up and take for a walk. But they used to do things like that, you know?
Yeah.
And me and my friends, we had a little gang, and, you know, we'd have all this freedom. We would just be allowed to go out. We're all ages of 4 to 7 or something, but you just cycled your bikes and went to the amusement arcade or went for an ice cream or something.
And just disappeared without parents knowing where we were.
Basically, or I'm not saying they didn't care, because, you know, you would check in with them. It was a small place, so it wasn't like a city or anything. And it was deemed as to be safe as well, you know. There was only very rare bad stuff seemed to happen, but not so much, because there was a sense of community as well. Other people in the island would know who you were and would also look out for you. Yeah, for sure. So where does the title come from? Who's looking after who? I think it's just because they were running a business and trying to navigate that by looking after kids at the same time. And, you know, in the book, my brother's working on dishes at 4 years old, and it's like, who is actually looking at it? My grandparents are there, and sometimes my mother's basically trying to find babysitters to look after the kids while she works, because she had to work really, really hard. So I think that's it. Who's looking after who? Is my mum looking after my dad? Is my mum looking after me? Or am I looking after my dad? You know, it's that kind of thing.
Yeah. And health and safety concerns, that's changed a lot now, hasn't it, since then in hospitality?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I actually followed in their footsteps and went into hospitality and got my own business in the year 2000. And even since then, health and safety's changed a lot. But back in the 70s and 80s, it was madness. And actually, Fawlty Towers is quite accurate, because that's like, was my upbringing, basically. And like, some of the stories are kind of Fawlty Towers-esque, you know. It's like, you're like, oh, that actually happened. And I think younger people like that are from now, they don't realise the luxury that, you know, you go to any hotel, it's probably way better than most of the hotels back in the 70s, 80s.
Oh, brilliant. So have you already written book 2, or do you just know what it's going to be about?
I've set it, like, the end of like this book, I've kind of opened up a lot of options, and like, I always knew it was going to be set in the hotel that they bought. And yeah, I've got some ideas. Unfortunately, my dad's passed away now, and so, but I've got a good support group that remembers stuff as well. So we'll chat about it, and I'll take that stuff and I'll make because it's a bit quirky. What I do, I don't just use it as conventional story. I make it a bit mad and a bit crazy. So I've got some good ideas for it already, and I'll probably start writing it next year.
Yeah. And what do you think your mum and dad would say about the book?
I think my mum would she would go, "Oh, Jamie, I can't believe you've written that." But I think she'd be actually secretly happy because I've written about her.
Yeah.
It's like, because my mum was a bit crazy herself, like, you know, she, not in a good way crazy, you know, she wanted a mad life, and she had a mad life. And then I think she'd be proud that I've written about them, about our family. Yeah,
nice. And what about your dad?
Yeah, well, he was there for half of it, and unfortunately he read the first half, and I think he enjoyed it. And he's like, one of my friends said that she was reading it at the computer, and he spat out tea at one point because it was like, well, they knew me. I have a very outrageous sense of humour, so I thought that's quite a good sign if he's spitting out some tea.
Yes. Way to summarise your dad's reaction. He spat out some tea.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Well, it's kind of like, you're right. Well, because I suppose I did have to write some very mild sex scenes about my parents and stuff like that. So maybe he's kind of talking out that.
Yes, that's weird. That must have been difficult on so many levels.
Yeah, they're more funny, so it's fine.
Fair enough. Well, if people want to get a copy of Who's Looking After Who, it's out now. It's available on our website, TRE.radio. It's by Jamie C. McNeish, who we've been chatting with today. Jamie, thanks so much for joining us. I can't wait to read the book.
Oh, well, thank you very much, and thanks for talking to me today.
The Book Programme, presented by Hannah Murray.
Talk Radio Europe.
Your voice in Spain.
The Book Programme, presented by Hannah Murray.
Welcome to the second part of tonight's book show. In the first hour, we were chatting with Kat Thurston, Emmanuel Olympitis and his daughter Olympia, and Jamie C. McNeish. In this hour, we're chatting to Rosie Radcliffe, who embarked on fulfilling her lifelong dream of becoming a writer when a rare form of arthritis ended her working life as a priest and left her in a wheelchair. Rosie writes about her challenging life issues with a lighter touch, where coffee shops, cake, food and people watching feature heavily, just as they do in her own life. Frankie and Dot was inspired by Rosie's visit to a women's prison. It follows Frankie, an ex-socialite, as she rebuilds her life after being framed and subsequently imprisoned for arson. We're also chatting with K.L. Huntley, whose career has stretched across from the music industry to prison employee. Her novel, Mishnok, The Story of Flora MacDonald, is the story of a fascinating historical figure she came across while researching her Scottish genealogy. Flora played key roles in both the history of Scotland and the American Revolution. We're also chatting to Lisa Lucas and Steve Landsberg, who are authors of a historical novel for young adults called Ping. It was inspired by and based upon Thelma Hall, the American ping pong player. It looks at how the innocent game of ping pong evolved into a political phenomenon. And finally, we chat to Mira Harrison, a doctor turned writer who trained in the NHS. 1 in 3 is based on her real-life experiences as a junior doctor in NHS hospitals during the 1980s. And that's tonight's book show on Talk Radio Europe.
The Book Programme. Presented by Hannah Murray.
Joining us on the line now is Rosie Radcliffe. When a rare form of arthritis ended her working life as a priest and left her in a wheelchair, she embarked on fulfilling her lifelong dream of becoming a writer. Her novels are set on the Lancashire coast, where she lives in a rural village with her long-suffering husband and cat. Rosie writes about challenging life issues with a lighter touch, where coffee shops and people-watching feature heavily, just as they do in her own life. She's with us on the book show to talk about her latest novel, Frankie and Dot. It follows Frankie, an ex-socialite, as she rebuilds her life after being framed and subsequently imprisoned for arson. It was inspired by Rosie's visit to a women's prison, while also drawing comparisons from her own life after being confined to a wheelchair. Welcome to the book show, Rosie.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you with us. And so it feels like this novel has a little bit of you in it, or your experiences and observations.
Yes, I'm guessing every writer puts something of their own experience into a book, whether that's conscious or not. The visit to a women's prison had really quite a profound effect on me. All my stories start with that what if question. You know, what if you were in the wrong place at the wrong time? What if you went to prison for something you didn't do? What would it be like? And then the what if went from there to, and what if you were the kind of person whose background was very privileged, and so it was a million miles away from everything that you were used to. And it kind of grew from there.
Yeah. So tell us about your experience then when you visited this prison. What was it like? Why did it have such an effect on you?
I don't know. Maybe it has to do with being ever so slightly claustrophobic. But in order to get in at all, you have to go through so many gates and be locked, opened and locked behind you and opened and locked behind you. And they're all metal and they all clang. The noises just gradually gave me the shivers and made me want to say, can I go home now?
Oh, yeah.
So although it was a very nice visit, because this particular women's prison that I was visiting, they weren't in, what would you call it? A long prison block, the cell block. Once you've been there a while, and if you behave yourself, they move the people out into houses of about 16 people.
Oh, wow.
So it has much more of a community feel. You're still living with 16 people, but it's perhaps less daunting than life on the wings. And then we actually met the person I was going to visit. We met her in the chapel. There was a strange contradiction between the peace and loveliness of the chapel, and out of the windows all you could see was bricks and blocks and barbed wire, So, it did leave quite an impression on me, that.
Yeah. So tell us about your main character, Frankie.
So Frankie is a socialite. She lives in a lovely part of London. She's a cabinet minister's wife, and she has a lovely life. Even though her husband is not faithful and is not straight, she's got a life and she likes it, and she's prepared to live that life until she tells her husband that she's leaving him. And then he frames her for setting the house on fire. And she goes to jail.
Gosh.
But the book does touch on her experiences in jail, but that's not what it's about. It's about coming out of jail with nothing at all, nothing of her old life to hold on to, and accepting the only offer of accommodation that's made to her, which is one of her prison friends runs a boarding house near Blackpool and says, look, we've got a room. It's somewhere to begin. So that's what she does.
And this is Dot.
And no, this is Frankie.
But Dot is the person that gives her the place to stay.
Dot is a fellow resident of the boarding house.
Right.
But she's not what she seems to be. Dot enjoys pretending to be a slightly dotty old lady. And as the reader discovered, she's nothing of the sort.
So it's a lot about their kind of friendship or relationship.
Yes, very much so. Yes. Two sort of unlikely people in an unlikely setting come together and support each other.
Yeah.
Dot, I think, is more bored than anything else. And Frankie is just stunned and how on earth do I start? So she gets a job as a cleaner, which she doesn't like, but she says, no, I can do this. It's a start. It pays the rent. Things will look up. And it's all set where I live, which is the northwest coast of Lancashire, a bit down from Blackpool. So it's set in Lytham St Anne's. And Lytham St Anne's is almost like two villages. Lytham is the sort of slightly upmarket end, and St Anne's is more downmarket these days, although when the railways started, St Anne's was a very popular place to go for your holidays. So St Anne's has come down in the world, but Lytham's come up and has rather a pleasant cosmopolitan feel with no sticks of rock or candy floss in sight.
Nice. So it's proved to be a good setting for the book.
Yes, and also it's one I know really well and can imagine in my mind. My disability means that if I wanted to set in a book in Malaga, I could get on a plane all right, but there are lots of barriers to my going places and researching backgrounds.
Yeah.
So, and also I thought it was time that a book was set in the north of England, because people have this idea of dark satanic mills and all that stuff. And honestly, the coast where I live is gorgeous.
Yeah.
And it's just such a lovely place that I thought, well, it's time that I promoted it a bit.
Yeah, good for you. And do you like putting into your books? I mentioned in the introduction, you often write about kind of challenging life issues, because obviously you can relate to that being in a wheelchair. Is it important for you to talk about those issues so other people in a similar situation to you can relate?
Yes, it is important. I think it's so important that I'm almost banging a drum, so my characters are always up against something in social terms. In Frankie's case, it's that she's, quite a posh woman in what is to her an alien environment. But I do write about disability, but not ever in the sense of, look at me, poor old me, sitting in this wheelchair, but about the real life of what that's like. Like I say, not a plea for sympathy, but rather to help people understand. Hey, I'm a human being. Yeah. I may be sitting in a wheelchair, but do not talk over my head at my husband. And that does happen sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? I've had this conversation with a few people in the past, and it's people often feel, people who aren't in a wheelchair sometimes feel uncomfortable talking to people in a way, and they don't know where to look, as if looking at you in the eye is somehow a bad thing. But it's much worse to not look at you in the eye, as you say.
Well, yes. I mean, there's that classic phrase in the disabled community, does he take sugar?
That's awful, isn't it?
Yeah. And
really awful.
I mean, I've had that, what would Rosie like? Well, why don't you try asking her?
Yes, absolutely. No, it's really good to remind people of that, definitely. And in a light-hearted way that you do so well.
That's very much my attitude, really. This has happened. I'm stuck with it. Nobody knew that it was in the family, this disease, but it turns out to be. My sister has it as well, and so does my niece. You can either lie down and say, oh dear, poor me, or you can fight back and say, well, okay, I can't do those things anymore. What can I do? And the answer is, I'm very good at sitting down at the computer.
Perfect. What's it called, the disease?
It's called psoriatic arthritis. And nobody's ever heard of it. It's very rare. If you think about rheumatoid arthritis, and that's inflammatory rather than osteoarthritis, which is where the joints kind of wear away. Rheumatoid arthritis affects 28 joints, and psoriatic arthritis affects 68 joints and pretty much all of the major organs in the body, potentially.
Oh, goodness.
It's really funny.
Yeah, but not ha-ha funny, yes. I hadn't heard of it, but my mother had both rheumatoid arthritis and osteoarthritis and osteoporosis. She had quite a lot going on as well, but really, really not nice. So well done you for being so positive and getting on with things. It's great.
Well, I'm not positive all the time. I will admit to that. I have my moments of, why me? It's not fair.
Of course.
But then you really do just have to. I've got a life to live, and there's more of it behind me now than there is in front. So I'm going to seize the opportunity to do something I can do, because I've actually written 3 books.
Fantastic. So is this the first one published?
Yes, it is.
Oh,
yes.
Exciting.
Hopefully the next one will be out next year.
Wonderful. Oh, well, good for you. If people want to get a copy of Frankie and Dot, it's out now. It's available on our website, TRE.radio, and it's by Rosie Radcliffe, who we've been chatting with today. Rosie, thanks so much for joining us.
You're very welcome. It was lovely to be with you.
Hello, little Alan Bennett here. If I'm not writing books, then the thing I like most is listening to the book club on Talk Radio Europe. Fancy.
Joining us on the line now is K.L. Huntley, whose career has stretched across from the music industry to prison employee and then to a rural K-12 teacher in Montana. She has written various books, including Sociopaths I've Known and Loved and A Chick Named Charlie. She's with us on the book show to talk about her very unique novel about a fascinating historical figure that she came across while researching her Scottish genealogy. It's called Mishnock, the story of Flora MacDonald. It's a work of historical fiction that highlights the amazing real-life story of an incredibly strong, courageous and resilient woman who played key roles in both the history of Scotland and the American Revolution. Welcome to the show, Kathleen.
Thank you. Appreciate being here.
It's great to have you with us. And this was fascinating. So how did you find out about your Scottish ancestry, first of all?
I I was doing genealogy research, and I came across her as the 5th great-grandmother. However, I've not been able to substantiate that, and I like to be accurate. But I am first generation from Scotland, so it was very interesting to me to see that she was a heroine. That launched me into why, where, and how. And it ended up being fascinating history. I have a 5-page bibliography at the end of the book. The facts are as accurate as I could make them. And I only invented one character. The rest were actual true people.
Amazing. So tell us about this Flora MacDonald then.
Flora was about the age of 24, and it was after a major battle in Scotland called Culloden, about 1744. And she was responsible for getting Bonnie Prince Charlie, the pretender to the throne, out of Scotland alive. And she was a very educated woman. She spoke French, English, her home language of Gaelic, and read and wrote Latin. As a child, she had ran the hills of Skye, so she knew all the trails and the caves where they could hide and the people who were loyalists to him. And it was quite the adventure. She was convicted of treason as a result. And the little-known history is that the British Empire at that time was using the colonies as a penal institution. It was before Australia. And so the POWs from Culloden, there were 3,000 of them, were sent and sold to the colonies as slaves. And they weren't the only ones. And this is kind of brushed under the carpet. We don't like to acknowledge all of this anymore.
Yeah.
But she eventually ended up, what was so intriguing is she ended up in the colonies. And at that point, the kings had changed from George II to George III. And she became a loyalist to George III. Now, this is all addressed in the book and her apprehension of getting involved in the revolution here. And she actually was a very shy person and was uncomfortable with her own notoriety.
Interesting. So why do you think she's not more well known for what she did?
She's well known in Scotland. My cousin said to me, how did I crawl into their Scottish, what would you call it? And their persona and their personalities. And I said, well, mother, grandmother, great aunt. And there are statues to her in the town of Inverness. And actually her funeral had over 1,000 people. And they drank 300 gallons of whiskey, which is typical of the Scots.
Yes.
But it's just a part of history. There's so much that we haven't known globally. And it's of a lot of brave individuals who have done things that have actually changed the course of history.
Yeah.
And their names just kind of disappear.
Particularly women.
Well, I was going to say that myself, so
okay.
Yes, there were a lot of women who, most of the history has been written by men, for men, and about men. And so this was fascinating for me. It took a couple years with the research, and like I said, there is a bibliography to Mishnock in the back of the book. If somebody thinks, oh, that couldn't have happened, you can double check me. It did.
Yeah. Gosh, so did you come across all kinds of fascinating facts that seemed unbelievable then?
Yes. I did not know that we had white slaves in the colonies. I did not know we had black brigades in the American Revolution on both sides. I did not realize that after the revolution, something like 70,000 people that had been loyalists left the country. And we all have the illusion everybody was happy. Not so much.
No.
And
It's fascinating, isn't it, finding more out about these periods of history that have been brushed under the carpet and trying to make everyone look good when there's a lot of dark history out there.
Yes, there is. And the English, after Culloden, marched through Scotland and did the scorched earth policy. So they took all their animals, their cows, their horses, their chickens, and they took them back with them or ate them, and they burned farms, they raped women. It took Scotland a long time to recover from this attempt.
Gosh, and we're only talking how many hundreds of years ago?
Well, several. It was about 1740. The book it starts from her age of 24 approximately. We don't know her exact birthday. And it takes you up to, so that's 150 years ago. Almost.
Incredible. So without giving too much away, can you tell us a little bit more as to what happens in the story and with Flora?
Oh, yes. And actually, I made an error. That would have been over 200 years ago. Yes, I picture the Scottish culture at the time and how they survived. And she was a very strong woman, very talented, wrote her own music. And I think I would have liked her very much. And she had quite a few children, I think 7. And that was one of the reasons they stayed as loyalists when they came to the colonies, which she did return to Scotland. After the American Revolution, she went home, literally left her husband, which was unheard of.
Yeah.
And he did not join her for 4 years.
Goodness. So how long was she in America for?
Very few years. She, now that you asked me the dates, and I don't know if I have them exactly written down, but she got here just in time for the American Revolution. So that was 1777. And then he was incarcerated. Then they went to Nova Scotia. It's an amazing story. And eventually she returned to Scotland. So I would say less than 10 years. And even the churches were divided. There were 2 Presbyterian churches at the time, which is the church that most Scots belong to. And one was for the king and one opposed. One wanted independence and the other one wanted to stay as loyalists. And that's a fascinating part. I went into the actually Presbyterian church archives and got that down. They had services, and the language of Gaelic was spoken in the United States right up to the Civil War, which would have been 1860 to 1864.
Gosh, that
was
recent.
A common language.
Yeah. And the title, Mishnok, that's a Gaelic word. What does it mean?
It means courage. And I have had to correct so many people. I'm thinking I should have titled it something else. But it is Mishnok. It means courage. And it is the story of Flora MacDonald.
Lovely. With regards to your inspiration to become a writer, I understand it was your work in prison that inspired you to teach and write. Tell us about that.
Well, it inspired me to teach because the true story is I actually paroled a man for the 3rd time and realized that the institutions are not working because the percentage in the statistics, how could somebody get to do that 3 times? And I decided to go back to school and start with younger children and elementary schools, and figured we have to improve our society from the ground up.
Yeah, good for you. And has it been rewarding teaching?
Oh, I loved it. It's the first job in my life. I'd say 99% of the days I wanted to be there. I wanted to get up and go to work. I loved it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, if people want to get a copy of the book, it's called Mishnock, The Story of Flora MacDonald. It's available on our website, TRE.radio, and it's by K.L. Huntley, who we've been chatting with today. Kathleen, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, Hannah, thank you so much for having me. This has been delightful.
The Book Program, presented by Hannah Murray.
Joining us on the line now is Lisa Lucas, who started writing for Reader's Digest and freelancing for newspapers. Several years ago, she joined forces with Laura Stein, an illustrator, and together they've created a number of children's books. Over the last few years, Lisa's changed direction and is now focusing on poetry and historical fiction. Also with her is her co-author, Steve Landsberg, an accomplished award-winning advertising executive and entrepreneur. He's held executive creative roles at many top global ad agencies, leading the work on iconic global brands. Their book that they've written together is called Ping, and it's a historical novel for young adults inspired by and based upon Thelma Hall, the American ping pong player. It explores how the innocent game of ping pong evolved into a political phenomenon. Welcome to the book show.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
It's great to have you both with us. So, Lisa, this kind of came about because you were visiting a friend in Arizona who lived in a big apartment complex and had this area of ping pong tables. And she said, this is where the home of Thelma Hall. And you started to look into it.
Yes, exactly. I thought, who the heck is Thelma Hall? And as I did my research, and I found, her story was interesting on its own, but then you added the whole ping pong component of sports, and then the anti-Semitism component, and then the feminism component. And I thought, surely there's a good story here. And little by little it grew.
So tell us a bit more about Thelma. So it's Thelma Hall, is it?
It is.
Okay, sorry. Tell us a bit more about her then.
So she was a superstar, super ping pong star in the 50s. I believe she won 3 world champions in the late 50s. She and her sister, Leah Thal, they were a real pair. And they were forced to play ping pong because in Ohio, while they were growing up, the anti-Semitism was alive and well. And they started out as tennis players, but a lot of courts wouldn't have them play. And because they were doing so well in tennis, a lot of people were offended by that, a lot of anti-Semitic. So they were basically kicked into the game of ping pong because at that point, ping pong was the game for everyone. Anyone could play.
Wow, interesting. So, Steve, tell us how you got involved with this project. I know that you've been friends with Lisa for many years.
Yes. So one day Lisa calls me and says that she has been writing this book, and she kind of felt that she was stuck and needed a little bit of an outside perspective. And because of my background in advertising and storytelling, she thought I might be able to add or just kind of help her sort of think about opening it up a little bit more. And she sent me a manuscript, and I had some thoughts, and we discussed some of the narrative. And what I thought was really interesting was, Lisa touched on a lot of pretty much everything that's in the book, but I was very intrigued with the political aspect of ping pong and how it was really started as a communist plot to kind of expand communism through sports, through ping pong itself. And so I thought that was fascinating. And then Lisa agreed, and we just kind of discussed, how to expand that part of the story and and in a sense contrasted or literally ping pong the differences between what was going on with the family dynamic and sports and China and U.S. relations and Russian relations. So it just kind of expanded into a little bit more of a global, more of a global kind of subject matter.
Yeah. So tell us more about the political connection then with ping pong.
Well, as the book points out, there was a man named Ivan Montague, who was a British aristocrat from a wealthy Jewish family, and was a communist. And he saw that ping pong was gaining a lot of popularity, and he thought that he would be able to, through ping pong, connect with China, who was on the cusp of obviously communism along with Russia. But, he kind of reached out to Chinese authorities, and they finally kind of, after some exchange, he started this international club and brought China into it.
Wow, how interesting. So, Lisa, how was it for you doing something quite different? I know you've worked with other people before, but this is a very different style of book and subject matter for you.
It is and it's not, Hannah. I started out working for, as you mentioned, Reader's Digest. So I was doing a lot of research on those stories as well. And then I'm in newspaper, with my newspaper articles, I was doing a lot of research. And then I did a lot of writing for public health. It was only more recently that I got into my children's writing, which I had no clue about. And when my partner, Laurie Stein, asked me to get involved, I said, I have no clue how to write a children's book. But little by little, we figured it out. And then after a while, I said, okay, I want to venture into something else. So this is how this came about. And yeah, that's how it worked.
And for you, Steve, this was your first published book. So how was the experience for you?
Well, it was really interesting. And, it was a very interesting experience. I mean, Lisa and I have been friends for a long time, but we've never literally worked together. And it was just a very, I have to say, pleasant collaboration. And it was a good experience for me because I've written a lot of advertising, and I've written websites, and I've written articles, but never really something quite as long as a book. So it was a good experience, and I learned a lot from working with Lisa because, she has the experience I don't. I have some experience she doesn't have. So it was a good collaboration, and I've enjoyed it. Yeah. And the fact that it got published, I feel very fortunate, and I'm grateful that, the first book that I co-wrote is actually getting out there.
Yeah, great.
Hopefully more after this interview, but
nice one. So did you kind of work out exactly who was going to do what? Did you have specific roles in the writing process?
Yeah, Lisa basically told me what to do. We sat down and we discussed different chapters, and because Lisa had already written a pretty complete manuscript, and there were some sections that she was just she should own and had more insight into, particularly the family dynamic things. I think I added maybe some language, but we also agreed that whatever we wrote together, Lisa would have sort of the final edit, in a sense, to kind of put it through her voice. Not that it's not in my voice, but it had to kind of go through her, which I was perfectly happy with because she was the catalyst for the project in the beginning, and that was fine with me.
Yeah, and it worked well, Lisa.
Very well. Steve was just, when he says I was stuck, really stuck. And Steve was able to arc the story in ways that I couldn't have. So I think it was a wonderful collaboration. I mean, I don't think there was a day where we wanted to say enough already or enough, we've had it. We worked very well together.
So first of many, Steve, then.
I hope so. I mean, I would, maybe the fact that Lisa's in Canada and I'm in New York meant that we didn't get in each other's way too much. But no, honestly, it was, like I said before, it was a very pleasant collaboration. And I think that, there's that philosophy of lead, follow, or get out of the way. I was very happy to let Lisa take the lead on this because she has experience I don't. And when I had some thoughts and ideas, she was like, great, that's great. Let's do this. Let's do that. So it was just a very nice collaboration. And again, advertising is a collaborative business. I'm sure in many ways, writing novels is more of a solitary business. So it was nice that we can work together on something that's usually solitary and just kind of, figure it out. And there wasn't really any conflict at any point.
Great. So
doesn't always have to be.
No, for sure. So have either of you taken up ping pong?
I've played ping pong when I can. It's, I don't have a table in my house.
I keep threatening to. I'm terrible at any sport requiring a racket, so I'm assuming that might translate to a paddle, but I keep threatening to, Hannah.
Well, Lisa, you gave me my last birthday, I think you gave me a very nice ping pong kit with paddles and balls, so I'm waiting to use that.
Yes. You'll need to get slightly closer than New York and Canada to have a game together, won't you?
Yes.
So, Lisa, have you already discussed a possible future project together?
Yes, we have. These are early days. I have another book coming out, Hannah, in the spring. So that's going to be my next big push to get that out in a good way, productive way. And then after that, I'm hoping by next summer, I can, Steve and I can start thinking about next steps, what we want to do.
Great. Exciting. Well, it's been lovely to chat with you both, Lisa Lucas and Steve Landsberg. Thank you both very much for joining us. If listeners want to get a copy of your book, it is called Ping and it's out now. It's available on our website, TRE.radio, and it's by Lisa and Steve. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you, Hannah. Pleasure.
Thank you.
The Book Program. Presented by Hannah Murray.
Joining us on the line now is Mira Harrison. She's a doctor turned writer who trained in the NHS. She's published 2 medical textbooks and 2 collections of stories about women working in public hospitals. She's with us on the book show to talk about her novel, 1 in 3. It's based on her real life experiences as a junior doctor in NHS hospitals during the 1980s. Welcome to the book show, Mira.
Thank you, Hannah. Thanks for having me. Appreciate the invitation.
Oh, no problem. It's great to have you with us. And I know that you were kind of inspired to write this novel quite a while ago while you were still working with the NHS.
Yes, that's right. I mean, the idea for the book actually came to me my first weekend on call at the Royal Southampton Hospital in Southampton, which is where the novel is set in the first part. And I was 60 hours into my my weekend on call. In those days, we used to start on a Friday morning and work through with no scheduled breaks until the Monday evening. And it was early on the Monday morning, the same setting as the opening chapter of the novel. And I was attending, I think it was about the 11th or 12th cardiac arrest of the weekend. And I was kneeling on the floor next to a patient who my colleagues were trying to resuscitate, and I was holding his hand as the resuscitation was unsuccessful. And as I walked away, I had this feeling that one day I really wanted to write about this. I wanted to write a junior doctor's story and show others how it was for us in those days.
Gosh, that must have been awful. I mean, no amount of training can prepare you for that kind of thing, I imagine.
No, I mean, absolutely. I mean, we do 5 years at medical school, and in your final year, you are on the wards helping the junior doctors, but nothing prepares you for that moment when you're actually the doctor who is responsible, and you have to somehow cope. And it was very difficult. And I was only 23 years old at the time, and that's very young to become a doctor with so much responsibility. And I think one thing I wanted to show in the novel, I mean, I must stress it is a fictional tale. It's not a memoir. This is a fictional story. But I wanted to show really how difficult it is to cope. And the protagonist of my novel, James, he doesn't cope very well. In the first part of the book, he's really not coping at all. But as the novel progresses, it is a coming of age story. And as the novel progresses in the second half, when he moves to his second house job in Portsmouth at Queen Alexandra Hospital, he then he matures. And part of his the process is that he meets a woman called Ainsley, who's a trainee surgeon from New Zealand, and he falls in love. And through his relationship with Ainsley, he manages to deal with his first year in medicine.
Oh, and your inspiration for the character of Ainsley came to you later on in your career.
Yes, that's right. I trained in obstetrics and gynecology as a hospital doctor, which is a surgical specialty. And I did draw on my experiences training to build the character of Ainsley, who was very unusual in those days to have a female registrar, as that was the mid-grade, what we call the mid-grades in the surgical trainee program. It was very unusual to have a woman training to be a surgeon. And when I trained in medicine more than 30 years ago, we had no female consultants in obstetrics and gynecology, would you believe, which is women's health. And so we had no role models, and people who were wanting to be surgeons, women who were wanting to be surgeons, had quite a rough time of it. And what I tried to show in the novel is the experience Ainsley has, the sexism that she experienced in the hospital, and through James's eyes, we see, how most men in medicine actually saw female surgeons in those days.
God, it's awful, isn't it? You had some horrific experiences. You were once told to get out of surgery while you were still a nice girl. God.
That's right. And, I think another example, when I had a job interview for an obstetrics and gynecology post, the consultant who was interviewing me seemed to be more interested in my husband's hobbies than my, that you would think that he would be asking about my surgical experience and asking me academic questions. But unfortunately, medicine was, and to some extent still is, quite a patriarchy. And women have to, are expected to kind of fit into that system. And in those days, we really didn't have any way of reporting sexual harassment or unfair treatment, because if you did, you wouldn't get your next job. You were completely reliant on your consultant for your reference for your next job. And I'm happy to say that now, in recent years, the NHS has improved its processes, and women experiencing sexual harassment, there are now reporting systems for that. So that's one thing that has improved.
Yeah, thank goodness. I mean, it's bizarre, isn't it, that there weren't any female doctors for women's health. I mean, it's laughable, isn't it?
It seems very strange, and because I still work in women's health in a public hospital in New Zealand doing research, but I teach our junior doctors, and they find it amazing when I tell them when I went to medical school in 1984 that most of the medical schools were only accepting 30% women, that we were actually, the admission, gender was, part of the process. And I applied to Southampton University Medical School because at that time they were accepting 50% women. And, my juniors all laugh when I said, I say this to them and they say, that was very radical at that time. But yes, we, and the women who were, being trained to be doctors, we were expected to become GPs or community doctors. If you wanted to be a hospital doctor, that was seen as very unusual. And that was something I wanted to address in my novel 1 in 3. Although it is the story of a guy, of James, I wanted to show what the environment was like for both men and women in medicine at that time.
Yeah. And where does the title come from, 1 in 3?
Well, 1 in 3 was the rota that we used to work. So we used to work 1 in 3 nights on call. So you would work all day, and then you would work all through that night until the next day, and you would do 1 in 3 weekends. And you were lucky if you worked a 1 in 3 rather than a 1 in 2, because a 1 in 2 was working every other night for 24 hours, which was, not good. But it's also 1 in 3 also refers to the 3 main characters in the book. And in the first part of the book, James has a relationship with a sex worker in the red light district of Southampton, which is very near to the Royal Southampton Hospital. And in the second part, as I've alluded, he has a relationship with Ainsley, the surgeon. So there are 3 main characters in the book. So 1 in 3 refers to that as well.
Okay. Yeah, the sex worker thing is interesting. You're kind of challenging the accepted view of sex workers. Why did you want to put that in the book?
Well, it really infuriates me in fiction, in literature, when people write characters, for example, prostitute sex workers, and they're kind of cardboard cutout, 2-dimensional character, because I know from my experience in working in women's health, I've worked, I've offered healthcare to sex workers as patients and have met sex workers, and they're not cardboard cutouts of, somebody standing underneath a red light. They're women with complicated lives. Mm. And I wanted to show through the character of Jenny, she's actually working as a sex worker to pay her way through university. She's actually studying psychology. And I wanted to make her character just far more interesting. One of the joys of writing fiction to me is creating interesting characters. And you mentioned earlier, I wrote a book of short stories called Admissions, which is 8 different stories of 8 different women working in a public hospital. One of those women was actually a cleaner and at the hospital, but in the story about her, we find out she's also an amazing pianist. She's a virtuoso piano player as well as being a cleaner. And I just think that that's interesting because we all have different sides of us and all different parts of our personalities, our professional personalities and the ones we show to our family and friends. And doesn't it make for more interesting characters if people have things that are not expected about them?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's really good. You've done that. So you obviously spent a bit of time on the characters then and planning the kind of people that they are and what they would go through.
Yeah, I mean, the character of James was, as I said, was in my head for 30 years. I wondered, spent many years when I was training in medicine, and then I had young children, and I had this story that I always wanted to write, but of course there was no time to do it. So James's character was always with me. And I thought about him for many years, but it wasn't really until I started writing the book in 2019 that I really thought a lot more about the characters of Jenny and Ainsley. And I do work really hard on that. And I map out in my notebook when I'm planning the novel, I have a page for each character and I write down, their birthday, their background. And I feel I really get to know them and they become like my friends.
Yeah, I bet.
And what's kind of a bit strange about the novel finally coming out, because I think, I mentioned it's been quite a long time in my head and then writing it and then getting it published. It just feels a bit unreal now that these characters who've been in my head are now out there and are being read. And I'm getting these lovely comments back from people who have read the book just saying that they really like the characters, and that's great.
Yeah. So could you bring them back? Could there be a sequel, do you think?
Well, possibly. Yes, it was. Somebody actually asked that. We launched the book last week in London, and I had quite a few of my medical student friends and people I've worked with over the years came to the launch. And actually, one of the questions has been, will there be a sequel? Maybe, 30 years later. So maybe we'll see how this one goes.
Yeah. Well, if people want to get a copy of 1 in 3, it's out now. It's available on our website, TRE.radio, and it's by Mira Harrison, who we've been chatting with today. Mira, thanks so much for joining us.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks very much for your interest in book.
The Book Programme. Presented by Hannah Murray.
The TRE Bookshow is sponsored by audible.co.uk. Download one title each month, plus unlimited listening to thousands of Audible originals, podcasts and audiobooks. Just click on the Audible banner at www.tre.radio.
You've been listening to a TRE production. If you've enjoyed this programme, there'll be another episode waiting for you next week, right here on this platform, where you can also access our extensive back catalogue of shows and interviews. For more information on our live programming, social media channels and apps, and how to contact Talk Radio Europe, please visit tre.radio.